DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. DogWorks Radio Network presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to check out us on social media by searching for DogWorks Radio. And today we're continuing our Dryland Musher series with an athlete that's going to be representing Team USA in Sweden in a couple of months. Her name is Stefani Meyer. She's calling in today from Munich, Germany, but is a resident of New Jersey here in the States. Stefani, how's it going today?
It's very good.
Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Could you do us a favor and let our listeners know a little bit about you, who you are, and what you're all about, please?
My name is Stefani Meyer. I'm 55 years old. I was born and raised in Germany. I went to university there, studied chemistry and foreign languages, and then went first to Mexico and was teaching there at the German school and building up a chemistry lab, and then moved on to the United States where I became a citizen. And I got involved into the dog sports in 2010, I believe. I had a husky and had a little bit too much energy, and that is how I got involved in the dog-powered sports. I always have done one dog sports, scooter, bike, canicross, and now have that was a husky, a Siberian husky, and now I do have a Greyster. I do a lot of other sports. I run recreationally. I bike. I scooter. I ski, and I like music and play guitar and violin.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us today, Stefani. And you had mentioned that you're going to be representing Team USA in the one-dog scooter class. So my first question to you is this the same dog that you've competed in the past in other events, or is this, meaning the Siberian Husky, or is this a new dog with you that's competing?
That is a new dog that is competing with me. I lost the Siberian Husky last year. He was 12 years old, and I lost him. And then I looked into another dog, and Rachel Cobalt, which is also a competitor in Team USA, offered me a Greyster, which I got with 7 years. Her name is Bella, and she's just beautiful. And she has done, she's 2 years now, and she's done last year as a yearling a couple of races and did very well. And so I qualified to go to Sweden.
And I definitely want to talk a little bit about your event over in France. You had talked about doing a stage race off air before we got on, and I'm interested in finding out a little bit more about that. But you said that you're a relative newcomer to dog-powered sports. You had found out about it sort of in the grapevine, and then you started competing in it, and one thing led to another, and here you are. Where did you get your roots from? Was it just a local event that you sort of did for fun, or did somebody introduce you, or what?
The Siberian Husky that I had a little bit too much energy. And so I looked for ways for an outlet for that energy. and I hooked up with Jersey Sands Sled Dog Association and with the Pennsylvania Sled Dog Club. And that is how I got involved in dog-powered sports. And then I participated in a couple of races and got hooked.
It is
and
easy.
It went on from there.
It is easy to get hooked, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
So, Stephanie, you had mentioned that you lived in New Jersey and relatively close to New York. And I think people that are listening, they're thinking about dog-powered sports in the snow when you think about Iditarod and Yukon Quest and that sort of thing. Living very close to an urban center, where do you find places and time to train? Are you having to travel distances like you had mentioned over into Pennsylvania, or is it pretty much in your backyard there?
I train during the week. I train pretty close by in parks and state parks. But at the weekend I usually train in the Pine Barrens, which is on sand, which builds up muscles. And whenever I can get outside at the weekends, I spend hours training. And then I go in the winter. I go up to Maine, to Fort Kent. There is a biathlon center there, and I'm allowed to go on skis with a dog there. And so I train on snow too.
Stephanie, I spoke to one of your teammates that is also doing the one-dog scooter in a previous episode. His name is Dan Hanks, and he was telling our listeners just how exciting and exhilarating it is to be on the scooter with the dog, just about how fast you go, and just that teammate philosophy that you have with your dog with the scooter. You had mentioned that you've done other one-dog sports, including canicross and bike joring, and now with the scooter. Is this your favorite event, or do you have another?
And my absolute favorite event is canicross. And I feel that that's why I did the stage race now in France, is you build up a very personal bond between yourself and the dog. And in canicross, the speed is a little reduced, and therefore you can work on details, on right left, on ahead, on stay back, on all these commands. And bike touring and scooter, the speed is considerably higher, and therefore it's good if the dog is solid on the commands beforehand.
Right.
Before you venture into the sports.
So you had mentioned racing in France, and if I heard you correctly, you did the canicross in that event. Is that right?
Yes, that is the world's biggest, largest canicross race, and it's with about 300 competitors from all over Europe. Mainly, there are a couple of Canadians, a couple of people from the U.S. This year, I was the only one representing the United States. This year, there were 22 nations involved participating in the event, and there are 10 stages on 9 days. There is a night race, and the distances, it's not so much about the distances. They're between 5 and 10K. But the elevation and the elevation gain in each race is considerable. You have about 10,000 feet in each race up and down.
Wow. And you had mentioned that it's on the same course or in the same general vicinity as the Tour de France, which is the bike race. That is some considerable elevation gain up and down. How do you train for that, especially living in New Jersey where it's relatively flat compared to that, isn't it?
Yes, it is a challenge, and I went there a week before and trained in elevation, so muscle ache wouldn't hit me that hard, and I would get used to it. But in New Jersey, I do hill repeats, and that helps a lot. And we do have some hills that you can work on, and then you just work with hill repeats, and that brings up your resistance a little bit.
So when you went from New Jersey over to France, and I know you had said that you went a little earlier to train, how did the dog respond from going to your typical training routine here in the States compared to literally racing up and down mountains? How did she respond to that?
Well, first, when I brought her over in the airplane, the first day was absolutely shocked because dogs do jet lag the same way humans do. But I had about a week in Munich, and in Munich there is it's called the English Garden. It's like the Central Park in New York, but dogs are allowed to run free. And so I took the bike and let her run free alongside. And we did about, I would say, 20K, 25K each day. And after that, I went into elevation and did the same thing, but I was running then. And that is how I built up her stamina. But dogs respond fairly quickly to changes of that kind. So she was struggling less than I was.
And that's usually how it is, isn't it? Usually the dog just acts like it's no big deal at all. And here we are huffing and puffing and thinking it's the end of the world. Isn't that right?
Yes, absolutely.
So you'd raced over in France, and you had talked about preparing for your run over in Sweden, which is in October, if I have my info correct. And you're now part of Team USA. How did you go about getting picked for that? Did you have to qualify? And if so, what races did you have to do? And I guess the second part of that question is, did you do the races with the scooter, or did you do it in bike joy or canicross?
Well, as I applied for scooter, I indicated all the races that I had done with a scooter with this particular dog. So they had an idea of how I placed and what my time was. And I had to apply, and then I got picked.
So when you got picked, did you know who you were up against? I mean, was it a large pool of female one-dog scooter participants, or was it just sort of random? You guys put in an application with what you did and you found out later. What was the process like, if you don't mind?
I did not know how many other people were applying. I did know, however, this was a second round. I didn't apply for the first round. It was a second round, and that there were still slots left for the one-dog scooter. And there were other places left too, but I had applied for one-dog scooter. And I knew that Nina Baum was picked, and then I found out that Rachel Cobalt was picked, and finally I got picked as the third person.
And you had mentioned, Stefani, you had mentioned, Stefani, the second round, and that's interesting because I think just about everybody else I spoke to, and I think you're either the 13th or 14th person that I've spoken to, they were all part of that first round pick. Many of them had known about it since at least the beginning of summer, so they applied probably much earlier than you did, which brings up my second question. Being that you were late in the game in terms of being picked for the team, Has that affected your training strategy or anything logistic-wise being picked later than the other guys and gals?
It didn't, because I have a very young dog, and I was not sure whether she would be picked or we would be picked at all. So I train the way I think is adequate for my dog. If I then get picked for an event, that's a plus. If not, I continue training the dog the way I think it is best for her development. You have to remember she's only 2 years old. Yeah.
And that's great advice for anybody that is competing on any type of stage or in any type of race. They always say, race like you train and train like you race, sort of doing that mentality. I think it sets you up best for success, which brings me to my next question. And I think that you're going to have a really interesting answer for, because most of the folks that we've interviewed on team that's representing Team USA have not had the chance to travel with their dogs overseas. And it sounds like you're a veteran of this. It sounds like you've done this a time or two. Can you give a little bit of an example of what it's like to travel with your dogs overseas and do it relatively regularly?
Yeah, I have been traveling with my husky before, almost every year, because I still have my parents in Germany, and I do have usually only one dog in comparison to other competitors who have multiple dogs. Of course, it is more difficult to travel with multiple dogs, but with one dog, you just get the paperwork, the vet paperwork done, get your shots, get the vet paperwork done, and then you re-endorse it, and then the actual travel. Well, I always pick a flight that has no layover, so it's a direct flight, and I do not feed the day off the flight, so that the last meal is the night before. So there are no risks of accidents. I make the dog tired. That means I train as regular, and I try to find a flight that does not disturb the regular rhythm of the dog. So I usually take night flights, and my dogs, the Siberian Husky and now also the Greyster, they do sleep in their crate regularly. And so it is just going to bed and waking up somewhere else. I do, however, have to say that the dogs are usually very thirsty when they come from the flight. So it's good if somebody is picking you up or when you arrive that you give the dog plenty of water afterwards. I do not put a bottle on the crate, and the reason being is it usually runs out and it's just a mess. And I give a drink before, and then when he or she comes out of the crate.
Lots of good advice there for your fellow athletes and travelers. I'm sure that they will take heed to a lot of your information, considering you've done this multiple times. I guess my next question, since you are such a seasoned traveler, traveling overseas with your dog, as many of us do that travel a lot, we have certain things that we take along, whether it's personal things on the human side, like headphones or comfortable shoes or whatever that we take for our personal comfort on long flights. Do you do anything for your dog? Do you put anything in particular in the crate? Do you provide a toy or some type of stimulation? What are some things that people can do that are traveling long distances with their dogs, like on international flights like you do often?
Yes. Of course, you have the option to put a soft toy into the crate. In my case, it wouldn't make sense because she would shred it. What I do is there is her regular mat in there. I have, she sleeps on a mat, and that mat is in the crate, so it smells like her. And I put sometimes a T-shirt or some other personal item that I have worn before in the crate together with that mat, so she has my smell too, and she feels comfortable.
One final question in regard to the travel logistics. You had said that when you went over to France, you spent some time in Germany. I believe you said about a week before you headed over. I'm sure that your dog is a very well-seasoned traveler by now and enjoys the crate and that sort of thing. But how do you set up the arrangements when you're in a different place for extended periods of time? And I say this as a dog trainer because, when you travel to different places, the dog has to learn the routine, when it's going to go outside, where it goes. Does it have, are you in a hotel room versus a home? How do you work that into your training regimen just on a daily basis with the routine with your dog that travels so often?
When we go into a new building, I let her experience the room. She goes and sniffs all around, and then I do have her mat, and she knows mat means, that is the place where I can lay down, and I take that mat everywhere with me. So if I go to a restaurant, because in Europe it is permitted that you take a dog to a restaurant, that mat goes with me, and she goes on the floor. And so she has her regular routine as much as possible, so she feels comfortable and doesn't get nervous about the situation. And of course, I will never leave her anywhere unattended by herself while I'm traveling, because it's all new for her.
Stephanie, when I was approached about doing this series by your team captain, Nick Weiss, I had promised him that I was not going to ask 14 or 15 people the same questions on every episode. How did you train? Where did you get your dog from? Et cetera, et cetera. And I had no idea coming into this episode tonight that we were going to talk so much about training logistics and what you did overseas. But I think that really gives a great perspective for our listeners about what it entails that you guys have to do to travel with your dogs on great distances and what it takes. So I really want to say thank you for that information, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate your stories. We're about out of time, and I have a couple of other questions that I would like to ask. One of them is the question that I ask to all of our guests, and that is, if you could give a person that's just getting involved in dog-powered sports, no matter what it is, canicross, bike joring, scooter, rig, Iditarod, whatever, what advice would you give them? One piece of advice if they're coming to you.
Form a bond with your dog. That is the most important. Everything else will fall in place. But if you have a great relationship with your dog, then they will do anything and everything for you.
That is great advice, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. My last question, or I guess it's more of a comment from you, is now is your time to thank people. If you have people that you would like to give a shout out to, whether you have sponsors or friends or family, is there anybody that you would like to say thank you to here on the show?
I would like to congratulate all the teammates that have been picked to go over to Sweden, and I am going to be thrilled to meet you there and have fun with you there on the trails. I want to thank my family, especially my father, who is very supportive of my adventurous lifestyle. And my school, where I teach, because they give me permission to go to the event in the midst of the school year and are very supportive.
Excellent. And we are going to be sure to pass along any links to social media or whatever on your show page when this show airs. I want to thank my guest today, Stefani Meyer. She's calling in from Munich, Germany today. She is a resident of New Jersey and is going to be racing in the one-dog scooter class for Team USA in Sweden in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much for joining us, Stefani, and we'll talk again soon, okay?
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of my guest today, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio. Did you know that Alaska DogWorks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska DogWorks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.